This video will look at qualitative data analysis. So far we've considered quantitative analysis, where we have numbers and values that we can use to represent information. If we want to understand why something is the case, often we will need to do qualitative analysis. So we might, for example, use open questions, or we might interview people or do focus groups and so on. So if we want to understand the reason behind a particular point, or if we want to understand how people make sense of the issues, qualitative analysis will allow us to do that. In order to do that, a simple summary of how to do this qualitative analysis is given here. We identify the themes that have been covered, whether that is ideas or meanings, concepts. Once we have those, we put them into appropriate categories and code the data. Thirdly, we organise the data into groups, and then fourthly, we summarise the data. Once the data is in summary form, we're in a position to try to make sense of that information. So we need to interpret the findings. Let's look at an example of how we would do some textual analysis. So for example, we might have done a focus group or an interview, recorded the conversations and then transcribed them onto a Word document. So what do? Well, first we need to identify the themes, whether it's the ideas or the meanings, and use context codes to categorize them. For example, if we're looking at a cafe, we might think about food, drink, customer service. Sometimes the themes will come from prior reading, from your theoretical framework. Other times you will need to draw these out from what has been said. Then to categorize the data, we might use open codes. We need to identify the significant words within the theme. And then having done that, we need to organise the data into groups. It might, for example, be positive and negative points within each theme. The significant values that we use will depend on our research. Then summarising the data, and one way it can be done is to count the frequency of words or ideas within the text, and then finally to develop reasoned arguments for any of the deductions that you have made when you're interpreting the information. Let's look at an example here. This is the very first part of a focus group transcript that was conducted in 2010 at a sports centre and museum tea rooms. It starts with a brief introduction as to who was involved. So there's a mixed group of customers, different genders, different ages, but all were regular customers over the last year at this particular tea room. And they represented a typical group of people that would go. So having recorded the focus group, it was then typed up. Ignore the colour for now. The facilitator introduced the focus group with the question, why do you visit the tea room? And then different people gave different comments. So from here we have to identify the different themes. So we can see, reading down here, somebody's talked about the decor, talked about the portion sizes, talked about the hygiene standards, talked about the food, the chef, and so on. So these become the different themes for the research. Having done that, we can then draw up a summary box for the analysis. So here you can see that we have hygiene, environment, staff, food, and location as themes. Remember, you've only seen a very short extract of the actual focus group, and also remember that the themes that are chosen are dependent on decisions made by the person doing the analysis. It's acceptable for different people to use different themes as long as they can justify those. So for example, environment might cover decor and layout and seating. All these different areas could be themes of their own. And it's up to the data analyst to make the choice as to what those themes are. And then going back to the data within the transcript, what has been said under each of these themes. So for hygiene, for example, if we go back to the data, we've got information about poor hygiene standards from PL. The cutlery had stale food on it, hadn't been washed properly. Comment about the chef who looks dirty, didn't have a hat, clothes were dirty, hair was loose, nails dirty, and so on. So going through the whole of the transcript, we can put these comments under hygiene. And then we would go back for environment and go through here what's been commented on in terms of environment and so on. This table here is not complete. It's just to show you an idea of what it might look like. There will obviously be a lot more data if I continued and completed the analysis. Having done that, then we now have our codes. We could use codes like H standing for hygiene, S standing for staff, but we'll keep it simple in this example. The next step then is to put them into appropriate groups, and in this example we're looking at the good aspects of the tea room and poor aspects. So we've divided the comments into positive comments and negative within each of those themes. We've just put in here some of the comments made under each theme and each group, but we've also totaled up how many comments there were within that category. So looking at the full transcript, there were 3 positive comments, and they talked about staff having white coats as part of their uniform. But there were 16 negative comments, and the sort of statements they made were about lack of hats, dirty nails, dirty cutlery, and so on. So for each theme, we've identified how many positive and negative comments there are, but we've also given a summary of those key points that have been made. Again, completed, there might be a little bit more information, but you can see how this helps us to look at, for example, hygiene. On balance, there's a lot more negative comments than positive comments, and that then helps us to make decisions about it. So from this we might decide something has to be done about the hygiene. The same principle works with other types of qualitative analysis. It might be pictures. Here you can see a picture of the old Central Library in the background in Birmingham. Here you can see a picture taken from the same point, but obviously in the past, and you can see that the architecture, the buildings, are very different to the previous photograph. So if we compare these 2 photographs, we can identify the different themes that might be appropriate. Colour is something that distinguishes them. Transport methods, the use of the space, the types of buildings, possibly the street furniture and signage, the people or the number of people, and so on. So very simply looking at these 2 photos, we've identified when they were taken, one in 2009 and one in 1880. And then we can fill these in. The difference in terms of colour, it's a colour photo in 2009 but black and white in 1880. And that tells us a little bit maybe about the technology that we have, the status of technology. If we look at transport, in 2009 we can just see a small white van, whereas in 1880 it wasn't motorised vehicles, it was horse-drawn vehicles. In terms of space, in 2009 you can just make out a set of steps in front of the library, and in 1880 we can see that the road is very flat. In terms of buildings, very functional buildings in 2009, quite ornate buildings back in 1880, and so on. So it allows us to draw comparisons between different periods of time or different places or different imagery. So just to summarise then, whether it's words or pictures or any other form of qualitative data, the key steps are to identify the themes, categorise the data, organise the data into groups, summarise it, and then use it to make comments, suggestions, or just simply interpret the findings.